census changed boundaries, I now represent nearly all of Morgan County, except for Brown Township, which includes Mooresville. I no longer represent that. And the northern half of Madison, essentially north of 144. And then I go into southern Center Grove, which is Olive Branch south and over to 135. Picks up a little bit of Barkersville. It's new territory for me. It's all unincorporated. And then I maintained a couple of precincts down in Monroe counties, which is very rural. I'm so glad to get most of the county back that I served when I was county clerk. So I serve on 3 committees. House Ways and Means, which is the biggest task, is dealing with the budget. And then Public Policy, which covers topics of firearms, gaming, and alcohol, and depending on where we go in the future, probably cannabis as well. And then in Insurance. And then I served as Vice Chair of the Public Policy Committee. This is my 11th year in the legislature. It feels like my second. I mean, that time goes so fast, and you learn so much. I have a couple of bills that are still pending, and one is moving. I have a bill that's actually getting a lot of, welcome Representative Haggard. It's actually been getting a lot of press, a lot of very positive press about meat processors. I don't know if any of you have heard about it, but we're very much an ag community, and especially those who are hunters as well. Anyone involved in 4-H, you've probably experienced difficulty getting slaughter dates. Way out in the future. So this is a grant program that will help expand or establish. It's a 50-50 match for someone to get into the industry for small or very small meat processors to help with that. They still have a lot of hurdles to go through to get USDA approval, but this will help them with their own skin in the game, trying to establish more of those so we can have more of those local meat processors. I know even a lot of deer hunters were turned away during the season because there's a requirement of time and space separation between processing wild game and domestic cows, pigs, so they couldn't do both. And this will help them if they want to add equipment or location or even staff to do that. So that one everyone loves the policy. I'm still bargaining with the chairman of Ways and Means to get the funding for it. So we'll see how it happens getting out of the House and over into the Senate. I've had one bill pass that it prohibits the use of taxpayer funds for the provision of sex reassignment surgery within the Department of Corrections. It does not prohibit any other treatment, so they still have options, but it will not allow taxpayer resources to be used for the specific procedure of sex reassignment surgery. And then I still have a couple more about business personal property tax reduction, I guess an expansion of the threshold so that fewer businesses would have to pay the business personal property tax. And something else got folded into Representative Lehman's bill because it was so small it was hardly worth occupying committee time to discuss it, so I stuck it in his bill and it got passed. So that's what I've been working on so far. I'll go over the budget. Actually, I can't go into too great a detail because the budget amendment that we're going to release isn't going to become public until 5 o'clock today. So I have to speak in generalities. But the budget process clearly is a very long process. It starts about September and it goes through several iterations. The governor released his budget right around his State of the State address. And so we work on essentially 5 presentations in the budget. You have your governor's budget, which is his template and his wish list and his goals. Then you have the majority House budget, which is going to be released at 5 o'clock. And then you'll have a minority budget, and they'll want to throw in their amendments and what they think we need to spend on. And when it gets to the Senate, their Appropriations Committee has their version of the priorities. And then, of course, the minority caucus will also want to amend that. So this is a multi-step process. It's a lot of trading. The underlying foundation, though, is Indiana has balanced its budget for well over a decade. And we've now added that to the Constitution. We want to make sure that we always spend less than we're taking in. We keep suitable reserves, and we make, with anything that we have in the surplus, that when we use that, we don't bake it in so that it has to be spent year after year. We're going to make one-time strategic investments with surpluses, because that money is never guaranteed to be there again the next year. We only add it into the structure of the budget when we know we have a sustainable resource for the revenue. So we've been working on some things. Some of the big things that are priorities are the mental health conditions of the state and our health condition of the state. Our student funding formula, I think that you will see a huge proposed increase in that, if I can say the biggest ever in the history of the state of Indiana, even bigger than last year, or last budget. We have a major problem with Medicaid providers exiting the healthcare or care field if they're DCS providers, because their reimbursement rates are so low that they're literally losing money and they don't want to do it anymore. So we're working on increasing that to even more. See, the governor requested 83% of Medicare, and I think we've gone even beyond that. So hopefully our Medicaid rates will continue. Increasing, a proposed increase on my way pre-K to a higher percentage of the federal poverty level. It was at 127%. We're going to increase it, hopefully increase it over that. And giving our Economic Development Corporation a little bit more flexibility in landing some of the projects that Indiana, I mean, we have $22 billion of investment? Commitments to Indiana. Even with that, we have still lost out on some of these big projects. It's not because we can't put together a good package, it's because we can't act fast enough. So this will give them that flexibility to act quicker, so we're not losing to other states. And I will stop there and let the Senator Pro Tem talk about what's happening on his chamber.
Well, thank you, Peggy, and it's always nice to have Peggy in the room because she's really in the granular part of putting together that budget on the House side, and obviously the constitution of the budget has to start on the House side. They'll announce that tonight at 5 o'clock, and then sometime next week, presumably they'll pass it and send it over to us, and we'll get started on it. And lots of changes to go along, but the process works pretty well, and I'm happy to say that the House and Senate work really well together on it, and it's nice to have a sneak peek of some of what you're doing, so thank you. I'll talk a little bit about the Senate agenda that we have been moving forward. We've got nearly all of these passed and onto the House, not quite all of them. There's a couple that are still kind of in the works, and I'll try to reference those real quickly. But the agenda that we've worked on this year really is put together in a couple of different buckets. One is a fiscal bucket, one is a health care bucket, and health cost bucket, and data privacy and public safety. And so I'll go back and circle through each of those and kind of color in the lines a little bit about what we're trying to do. And as we finish up this, and as Representative Haggard gets to talk, then we can have a back and forth, and you can ask questions about anything you might want to know about what we're up to. Fiscally, obviously, we're with Peggy Mayfield. We want to balance the budget. That is our absolute intention, to spend within our means, and we'll end up doing that without a doubt. But that's a big priority. And part and parcel with that too, we've put together a tax commission that is going to look at how we structure taxes in the state of Indiana. Right now, frankly, I think we do quite well. If you look, lots of publications around say Indiana is very competitive, some of the most competitive in the nation, usually top 5 in how our tax structure works right now. But it's never to say you can't do it a little bit better. So we're going to take a look at that and see if, for instance, can we get to the spot where we don't have income tax anymore? There's a handful of states that have that: Texas, Florida, Tennessee. Tennessee is probably the most interesting to me because they have had lots of population growth faster than us over the last several years. And as part of that, because of the no income tax, maybe so. And we're going to study and take a look at, one, whether we can get there, whether it makes sense for us to get there. It's not overall a tax cut. Please don't misunderstand that. That's about $7.5 billion we'd have to find some in another form, sales tax, whatever the case, because we can't just step away and walk away from $7.5 billion and provide the same services we're doing right now. But that's going to be something that'll take about 2 years to kind of get through to figure out what, if anything, Indiana needs to do there. We're also going to take a pretty close look in that same commission at property taxes and see if we can provide some relief there. I know that property taxes are on lots of people's minds, especially when those bills come due in, well, they're due in May, but when they hit people's mailboxes in April, I think that that's going to be a topic of a lot of conversation. So we want to make sure we're looking deeply into that. The other thing we're doing on the fiscal side, just real quickly, is Senate Bill 2, which allows small LLCs and S corporations to deduct their state income tax, what they would pay individually, because that's a tax. Those taxes flow through the entity to the person, and they can deduct those on their federal income taxes. That's a benefit of about $50 million across the state, a benefit to Hoosiers. The state doesn't lose any money, nor does it get any money there. It's just a benefit to those small businesses across the state. So we're pretty excited about that change. It's just taking advantage of some federal legislation that's out there that's already in place. Senate Bill 1 is a mental health bill. I think we all are more aware of the mental health challenges that we have now as opposed to maybe before COVID. And so we are kind of working to overhaul that and kind of create more certified behavioral health centers across the state where people can get help and get help more quickly, get maybe same-day appointments. Right now, sometimes it takes weeks or months to get in. If you're trying to help somebody you know get in for a mental health appointment, it's frustratingly slow. So we're going to work on that by shifting. We'll do several things, but by shifting our community health centers to certified behavioral health centers, that avails us of a lot of federal dollars that can come in and provide better, faster, more reliable services in that field. Also, public health, we're trying to change the way we deliver some of our public health dollars. Right now, the public health is largely funded locally in the local health departments, and we rank about as good as you could say would be between 40 and 45th in the nation in that regard. And so we're trying to make some changes to that. Local health departments will still have that power, and just like we did a couple of years ago with Senate Bill number 5, the local elected officials like the commissioners will still be able to, if there are punishments or emergencies that the local health department puts in, the local elected officials will still be able to say, no, we're not going to go that way. I think it was important a couple of years ago when we did it. It still will stay in place today. But our hope is that we'll be able to, one, provide some more money for specific services. This is not a scenario where our intention is to just throw more money at a problem and hope it gets better. There's a handful of things that we are going to try to affect in a positive way, and we're going to, such as maternal mortality, infant mortality, smoking, diabetes, things like that. There's kind of blocking and tackling issues that are plaguing the state of Indiana, and one of the reasons we're one of the least healthiest states in the nation. And so we're going to set up some metrics so we can watch that and measure it, watch it, make sure that what we're doing is providing a benefit to Indiana, and then hold ourselves accountable. If in fact it's not, we go a different direction. So that's another one. That's Senate Bill 4, which is still in the Senate, but it will come out this next week and move over to the House. With regard to data privacy, Senator Brown from up in the Fort Wayne area has a data privacy bill that will impact and allow you to kind of have a lot more information and even give approval for what your data is used for when you're on social media or on the internet. In many ways, this is a bill that a couple of other states have tackled, but only a couple of other states so far. So it's kind of new legislation the states have been trying to tackle. But I think pretty important in this day and age that we're in right now. And finally, with regard to public safety, two things. One, with regard, just in the budget, we're going to pay our state police more. They are woefully underpaid when you compare them to other cities, towns, and counties across the state of Indiana. And we're going to try and remedy that in a fairly significant way. Not necessarily to make them the highest paid, but make it competitive. They have a lot more training they have to do than local folks even. And so, and they're providing a great product for us. We just want to make sure that they're paid, so we keep that force in place at the quality that it is right now. And finally, a debate and a discussion about a constitutional amendment that would change bond. So right now, you're not allowed to take public safety into consideration when you decide whether a person gets bond or not. It really has mostly to do with whether they are motivated to come back to appear in court. And so it takes a constitutional amendment. About 25, maybe more than, maybe 26 other states already have this in their practice, and the federal government does as well. But it will simply say if the evidence is strong that a person continues to be a risk to society, that a judge can, under the right circumstances, hold them without bond. Right now, you can only be held without bond in the cases of murder or treason. So that's in a nutshell with some of the things we're working on. Lots of other things moving through the Senate as well that I'm happy to talk about, but I'll stop there and let Representative Haggard take it on.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I apologize for my late entrance. I had a constituent meeting before this, and actually I chose this over Hendricks County legislative update, so Morgan County wins this one. If I think they win, I'll let you decide after I speak. I'll stay away from the big overarching parts because I know that Representative Mayfield and Senator Bray kind of gave the big picture. And so I'll kind of talk about, real quick, as a new legislator, what my perception's been, how it's been kind of what I've been working on. This is my first term, and I'm having an absolute wonderful time so far, so we'll find out in the end of April how I feel. But I love being part of the process, and one thing I tell you, I came from military background and small business background, so I wanted to stay in that wheelhouse, at least what I knew, and then try to learn and then educate myself on all the other aspects. And I used to call myself, I'm not a politician, I guess I am officially now, so. It's one thing I can say that I've learned, I've been massively impressed, is how much thoughtfulness and care goes into each of the bills that the Senate and the House work on. Both sides, you see, and when people talk about backroom deals, well, really when you're talking backroom, they're educating how can I make this better. As a young legislator, you go in and think, okay, my bills are the best ever. Why could anybody think anything different? They're perfect. You quickly find out they're not perfect, and they can be made a lot better. And admittedly, wow, I never thought of that or that angle. And there were so many. It makes you look at things from so many different angles, and I really appreciate that. And I'd like to think I've become smarter. Once again, I'll let you be the judge of that. But it's actually wonderful to see the process. And to be honest with you, my mind has changed a little bit because people say, oh, you have to jump through all these hoops and do all this to make something a bill or something bill into a law. I think that's awesome because when you start to realize how important every little thing we do and every little sentence and every may or shall that's in that bill is really, really impactful on the state and very important. So I think it needs to be difficult for a bill to become law. And you start to see that. I love being part of the process. And I think that Indiana does a great job in a lot of the areas. And like the senator said, we can always be better. That's why in the military, after every fight, we'd have a debrief saying, well, we thought it was great, but no, we can still improve on this, and this. And I think if you constantly do that, which I believe that we do, I think that we'll continue to grow in those areas. We definitely have some areas to work on health. I think we're always number one in the list of guys like me who need to work out a little bit more and things like that. But the thing is when we see that, I know these groups of folks are actively looking at ways to make those better. And there's a lot of different ideas on how to get to that goal, and we argue those ideas, and they don't always work. And you always, sometimes you make some people happy. I've already made people mad on Facebook, so I guess that means I'm doing something. But some of the bills I'm working on, I was happy and kind of proud to get one of my first bills passed through the House. And we'll see what the Senate does with it, so it'll be nice over there. That's House Bill 1323, and basically it's a very simple bill. We had our federal government coming down to a lot of states, In one in particular, Missouri, the FBI came down and wanted to do an audit on 37 sheriff's departments in 37 counties, and they wanted to just gather a list of law-abiding citizens' names and addresses and phone numbers of people that had gun permits. Now, I didn't really look at this like a gun bill, but it was involving that, and they fought back and forth, and Missouri eventually won and then put into law, similar to my bill, which basically says if we can share, law enforcement agencies of Indiana can share information with law enforcement agencies of the federal government if there's a single inquiry of a person of interest of an actual ongoing criminal investigation or a crime's committed. Standard stuff according to our state police and most of the sheriffs I talk to, because we really don't want our government gathering a list of people's names. That's just, I think there's some old enough in the room to know that's a bad thing. And so I was happy to say that was a bipartisan vote, which was a success. I had over 50% of Democrats to vote for a gun bill, so I think that was pretty good. But it was bigger, I joke, but it was bigger than that. It was about just defining that sort of thing, which I think is important. Another one, I've been co-author on a few firefighting bills dealing with PFAS, which is the chemical put into firefighting equipment that's been known to cause cancer. I know at this point they don't really have another chemical that does what it does, but we're going to hopefully label that I know is over in the Senate now, and just a few others. I was also sort of unofficially worked on a bill with the chairman of Veterans Affairs on the income, since even before I was elected we were talking about it. But I was one of the original co-authors. Now they've opened that up now for active duty military, passed through a committee in Ways and Means to not tax Indiana state income tax for active duty military. We already don't tax that for retirees and guards and some other stuff, so that'll hopefully once again incentivize some folks, because like the senator was talking about, Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, a tremendous amount of our active duty when they leave here. And I was one of those guys. I didn't testify to this, but I'll say I was one of those that became a Texas resident 30 days after living there, because as a young military member, and that money, it really did incentivize people to go back to those states. And we need good folks. And there's all sorts of awesome stuff, at least I know on our budget side, to bring industry here, to keep educated kids here and other things. We're looking for those answers. We don't necessarily have the right ones, but I can tell you everybody really, really is working hard, and I've already started because of one of the things we talked about in college with our budget, not to say what we said, but on the college, but one of the big concerns is health in Indiana, and one of those things that affects later in life is then increased in spending in Medicaid, Medicare, and things like that. And we are an unhealthy state. We just are by the numbers. And so I've started actually, we found an organization, me and Representative McGuire are talking when we had a call yesterday, just to try to find out and what are the top 10 states and how they're the healthiest, barring good weather and things like that, getting outside and maybe seeing what government programs pay off. And that's a big thing with me. I don't like just throwing money at stuff, and I know nobody here does either. But I want you all to know what government program has been put into effect and then actually had good results, big bang for the buck, and how are those. And so actually this one organization has a lot of the statistics. This is just the very beginning, but that just was a catalyst for me from our meeting about the budget the other day to try to do for the next year's session, because that's a long-term fix. But so we'll get into the question and answer, but thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me be late.
Thank you, and thank you to each of you. So we opened up, Jamie opened up our email for submitted questions, so I'm going to run through the list. I feel like a couple of them may have been covered, a couple of them could be combined, but we'll start with our first question. Indiana is currently #1 on the list of states that people are leaving. Combined with the fact that we already face workforce shortages and challenges, what are plans to help counter this trend and make Indiana a place where people want to live? And Peggy, if you want to start, Rob, go ahead.
The #1 where people are leaving?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
first
what
of
this
all,
rudder there is.
It's not accurate.
Okay.
If you look at the census data plus the speculation or the forecast that have happened since the 2020 census, Indiana was the only state in the Midwest, well, that's not true, with one exception in Minnesota. Indiana gained was it about 40,000 population? And, Minnesota maybe gained 4,000 population. Everybody else in the Midwest lost population. So it's significant that Tennessee is not in this category considered in the Midwest because they gained about 200,000 people. That's why I mentioned them when I talk about the income tax. But, we had maybe the old-fashioned way where children were born here, a growth of about 600 people, but of several thousand people that have moved in here. And it's because I think we have a good environment, good tax structure, good regulatory environment, low cost of living, and lots of opportunities. But so I guess in a way, in answering that question, I'm debunking the fact, but it really is not accurate that we're the tops in losing people at all. And I think it's because, hopefully it's because we've done some good things. Another quickly I'll say, and Peggy referenced this, we have grown capital expenditure and capital investment in the state of Indiana and broken records since 2017. So it's a record in 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21. In 2021, that investment was about $8 billion. So we were pretty excited about that. In 22, the new investment into the state of Indiana was $22 billion. So not only was it a record, we shattered the record from before. And we frankly expect that to happen again in 23 to be up about that number. And there's a couple reasons for that, which I'm happy to get into if we need to. But anyway, I want to ramble, so I'll stop there. Maybe somebody else has some thoughts about that issue as well.
Okay.
Covered it well.
Yeah.
This question is along the lines, keeping people in Indiana and attracting people to Indiana. The writer states, Indiana's culture wars legislation, RFRA, limiting women's health care options, etc., is starting to have a decidedly negative impact on whether or not young people in particular are considering the state as a place to attend college and or live after graduating with a degree. Do you have any plans to mitigate those effects? Is this a consideration at all in the legislators' decisions to move forward with this type of legislation?
Well, I think some of the statements that were made by the larger companies, they have pulled it back. So we're not experiencing what they said, Indiana's going to fold if you pass this law. That has not been the case, and those executives have withdrawn those objections.
Yeah, I would concur with that. Dave Birch, for example, is the CEO of Lily's, a very, very capable guy and a company that we're grateful to have here in the state of Indiana. But he has talked about, well, I don't know if I can invest in Indiana anymore, but he's putting millions and millions and millions of dollars in new investment up in Zionsville right now that they just decided on. I think we've got a good environment here. Some of these hot button issues are passionate to Hoosiers around the state of Indiana, and they're important that we do those. Not everybody agrees with them, but we wade into those with some discretion. It may not seem like that to people that are opposed to them, but these are important issues to a lot of Hoosiers that we need to talk about them.
Anyone else?
Well, just to piggyback on everything, I think the numbers show we've had, billions of dollars in new investment coming to the state. We had actual growth in Indiana compared to our surrounding states. And I hear those, one thing that also is nice in the background, you hear these big topics that get a lot of the press and negative and oh my gosh, the world's going to end. But the majority of what we do, Democrat and Republican, we believe in the same things. We want good education, we want safe streets, we want medical for folks. And we work on those things, those hot button topics. Yeah, and I've heard that, everybody's going to leave. But then I heard from the other side, this is going to bring people to the state. And I think sometimes those distract in what we're really doing. It's obviously important topics and people are passionate about both sides. But at the end of the day, it really hasn't changed. And if people believe in this, and I think they do, I think sometimes people will take the stand. I think it's worth the sacrifice. And I think nationally we saw that it probably had an effect on the national election, but I think people think, obviously, pro-life folks, it was worth it. It was a big win. So I don't see it as driving folks away.
Rod, this is something you shared with us, the Morgan County Leadership Academy. I don't recall what month this would have been in. Diane, maybe help me out. What percentage of legislature is passed with bipartisan support?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's a great
And this was off grid, this was not a written question, but
Yeah, no, I'll say that real quick, because I think it's just really, really important for everybody to know. And since Peggy and I have been in the legislature, we've started together, these stats have been almost the same every year, very, very close to the same every year. We pass between 200 and 220 bills, and as Representative Haggard said, we file about 1,200, so only less than a quarter we pass, but it needs to be hard to pass a bill in the legislature, first of all. But of those that pass, over 60%, usually about 65%, are unanimous, with every Republican and every Democrat voting for them. Of the bills that pass, more than 90%, usually about 95%, are passed with bipartisan support, meaning every Republican, not every, some Republicans and some Democrats vote for them, which really leaves the number of bills you can count on two hands, basically, that are those hot button items that go down the party line. Those are the ones, unfortunately, that you see on TV at night, because the basic blocking and tackling that we do all day long it's not sexy and it's not inflammatory, and the press doesn't like to talk about it. But that is what we spend 80 or 90% of our day doing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, back to the script, sorry. I'm going to combine a couple questions here. The writer states, the Indiana legislature continues to push expanding the school voucher system that funnels public tax dollars into private educational facilities that are not required to meet the same requirements as public facilities. Can you explain why these facilities should not be held to the same standards as public schools if they're receiving public dollars? And then to add on to that, what are your thoughts on the Senate bill regarding increasing amounts for ESA education vouchers? Are you aware this would go towards the school choice of the parents choosing? So kind of
Could you
combining
repeat that last sentence?
It's not well written. As you're aware, this would go towards the school choice of the parents choosing. So not public schools.
Okay, well, I think that it is the overwhelming feeling of the legislature as a whole that school choice is a good thing, and you have to consider that our choice program isn't just the voucher program. Our choice program, where 80 plus, 85, 86% of the kids are going to a traditional public school, but even within the public school, the largest number of kids who are not going to the school where they reside, they are going to another traditional public school. They are not going to a choice scholarship school. There are about 53,000 kids in the state using vouchers. So that is, we had the whole court case with the Indiana Supreme Court weighing in that the public dollars were not going to the private entities. The public dollars were being given to the parents who in turn assigned them to the school. So it is not public funding of private institutions. It is funding the student, and the parents is directing that money to be given to a certain entity. It works. That's all I can say is it works. Our choice program, if you don't like the public school you're in, you can choose another public school. If you don't like the public school you're in, you can choose a private school. If you don't like the private school you chose, you can move again. So it works for the family, and my feeling is that child needs to learn in the environment that is best for them based on their family's decision and not someone else's.
And I just want to throw one thing, and they always say it's tough when you have somebody testify on a bill and it's that one personal experience, because that, just because something happens once doesn't mean create a law for it. But just as a person or parent who's used that choice, our youngest son who's autistic was in the Perry school system, and no offense to the Perry school system, but their special needs program really is not good, in my opinion. I'm sure it's great folks there, but there were better ones, and we moved him to the Mooresville school system for their special needs program, because it is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful program. And they took him from a kid in Perry who could hardly do math or even write, and he's in his first year of physics at UIndy with a B average, and I think that's pretty cool. And so, but it was using that choice program where we were allowed to say, hey, as long as Mooresville agreed, and to use our money that we paid into the system to then choose to give him to the folks in Martinsville. So just as a personal experience.
Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts? I'm not sure if this is an issue you guys can address, but the exit at I-69 and State Road 39 coming north remains to be a matter of public concern. NDOT reported earlier that additional signage has been installed to aid in the situation. Do any of you feel other measures are being considered?
I'll take that because I've been somewhat involved. And it's very limited what the legislature can do regarding roads. It's actually in our Constitution that we do not interfere on how roads are constructed or where they go. But it's clearly, I think there have been last count, 18 accidents in that cloverleaf since it opened. And when I spoke to someone in public safety, there were 6 on a single day. So while we can't really, and I've taken it. I specifically went south down to Liberty Church and came back and hit that exit at the posted speed and didn't have a problem with keeping it. But the visual cues that you get when you have that concrete block, there are exit ramps that are just as tight or tighter with the same speed limit. But they don't have a concrete wall that doesn't let you see where that curve is going. So, you can't see it as you're approaching it. I think that we might propose or ask, whatever, we're not gonna change the road, but can we reduce the visual block so that a driver can anticipate the road before they get there? That is something that's under consideration, but I don't know when or how. That would be another project that would have to go through all the steps to happen.
Thank you. Rod, you spoke a little bit about Senate Bill 4, and so maybe if there's just anything in addition you'd like to add that maybe you didn't mention, but what measures are being taken towards mental health? So much is coming forward emphasizing the need for treatment, but funding is limited to families, insurance, and government. Locking people up in correctional facilities is not the answer.
First of all, I completely agree with that last statement. About 60 to 70% of the people in our local jails have some form of mental illness or addiction, and that is a big number. And there's 2 things going on. Our Senate Bill number 1 is really the one that deals with mental health. Public health Senate Bill 4 will impact it as well. And so we're trying to do that, and we'll decide as the budget moves through exactly how much we're able to fund that Senate Bill 1 with. But the other one is really a House bill with Representative Sturwald, and I would invite either Peggy or Greg to weigh in on that. But it's a pretty neat piece of legislation that will reformulate what judges can do, and rather than just put somebody in a local jail, which is really a lot of what's happening now. If somebody's a problem because they have mental health or just isn't anywhere else for them to go. Maybe they sit for a few days in an emergency room somewhere, but otherwise they end up landing in our local jails. The sheriffs are not, nor should they be equipped to handle that kind of a challenge. And so this bill that the House is sending over to the Senate will allow these courts to take them out of those jails and put them in, under the right circumstances, into mental health facilities. It's going to be incumbent upon us to make sure that there are facilities out there, which is a challenge for us right now, plus that there are people licensed to help those folks, which is a massive challenge right now. There just aren't enough in the state of Indiana.
I know that Representative Sturwald has been working with a whole bunch of players on this well over a year ago, because one of the things that when I first started to run, we started to talk about, and he was nice enough to let me in on a lot of the emails and conversation, because the biggest problem is, and I will say, fixing mental health, I don't think these bills won't fix it, but it's taking the first bite out of that pie, and it's going to take a few sessions and years to do, because it's a very complex, it's not just the locking up, but it's getting them to that. I know that Greg's bill, Representative Sturwald, deals kind of with the evaluation of those folks that come into the jail system. So number one, a judge being able to do so quickly, get those folks evaluated, because the way it currently is, they can sit there for weeks without being able to get evaluated, getting an order to get the evaluation, and a whole bunch of stuff. So it deals not only with the court system on being able to get those folks evaluated, but also with the hospitals being able to have them stay there longer than a very short period of time that they can stay now, so they can actually have an actual proper evaluation. And then also dealing with those providers that have the qualified folks, which we're short of these days, to be able to get the right folks and licensed folks to be able to do that. So it's kind of streamlining that process to have an evaluation so they're not just sitting in jail. Because I can tell you from visiting firsthand, Hendricks County just built a brand new jail, anticipating the growth of that area, but also they have basically an entire wing, it's kind of an octagon thing, but a wing that's for their mental health folks. And because right now that's what they have to deal with, and they are not equipped to help these individuals in any way. Those, not only mental health folks, but people with addictions, things like that, and that's another issue. But and they recognize that. They want them to have, it's just not the place for them. So that's just an overview, Peggy.
And one thing is, our Morgan County Sheriff, Rich Myers, he is on the Sheriff's Association's legislative body, and so is Sheriff Burgess in Johnson County. So two of us, actually all three of us, deal with both of those. They are constantly bending our ear. Mental health is such a huge issue. The Senate bill is really more for the general public addressing it, and then the House bill was more on the criminal side, just making sure that those inmates are getting the appropriate treatment and in the appropriate setting, which is not in jail.
Okay, we'll continue with a few more health questions. What are the chances of the General Assembly is going to pass language in Senate Bill 6 or House Bill 1004 that addresses dishonest billing by hospitals?
So I'll start on that. So Senate Bill 1004 has lots of things in it. Senate Bill 6 is simply a site of service bill, is what most people call it. And it's the quick issue is this, that hospitals are allowed to charge a higher fee for services that are provided within a hospital, and the fee is supposed to be lower when the services, whatever service it is provided, and it's not in a hospital facility. I think the basic idea behind that is it's expensive to run a hospital. Typically you have an emergency room, people come in there, they have to get service whether or not they have the ability to pay, etc. And so the compensation for a hospital, Medicaid, Medicare, whatever the case, is going to be higher in that hospital facility. And what has happened, and I'll give you a quick example with my wife and I. We both went to the doctor one day, same appointment together, same issue, is that we're about 50 and it's time to have lots of tests, right? So we had a blood test, each of us exactly the same. I circled around the next day to go to the doctor's office and I had that blood test and it was $90. My wife, exact same test, couldn't get to the doctor's office, went to the hospital to have that test, $900. That's the sort of thing that you find that's out there, and it's wildly frustrating for folks. But the other thing that happens is that the hospitals will bill the hospital price for facilities that aren't on the hospital, and so that's what Senate Bill 6 is. In all candor, we have a number of bills that are there to address our healthcare costs because they're higher in Indiana than they need to be based on we're in the Midwest, our cost of living is lower, and we're one of the highest in the nation, not the Midwest, but in the nation. So we're trying to address that in a fairly aggressive way. And so that bill has passed out of committee. It's sitting on the House chamber for seconds. We're also trying to work with the hospitals really on a daily basis right now to find something that works, that they think will work and that we think will work. So we're really working together in that regard to do something that works for the state of Indiana and can lower those healthcare costs, because it's probably the most, from my perspective, the most important thing outside of passing the budget that we'll do this year.
Yeah. And go ahead, Peggy.
On 1004, but and just to kind of explain, the legislative priorities in the House, the numbers go 100 something. So anything 1001 through 1010 are basically our legislative priorities. In the Senate, is it 1 through 5, or do you go all the way up to 10?
This year, they're 1 through 8.
1 through 8. Okay, so the single-digit bills, those are their priorities. 1004 has not made it out of committee yet. I think that they are going to hear it Monday or Tuesday and offer some amendments. And that's the thing about these big agenda bills. No matter what comes out of this committee hearing and passes on the floor, this is not the end of the topic. It will be addressed and constantly tweaking in future years. But what 1004 does is kind of light a match under everybody and bring everybody to the table, and we start talking about it. We've always had this silos of hospitals are doing this, doctors are doing this, Medicaid does this, and this has sort of brought them to the table. And pharmacy, don't forget pharmacies. This has all brought them all to the table and say, where are we going to control costs? It's almost like you're in the car and your mom's driving and she says, don't make me pull over. The legislators starting to pull over, and so they're listening. It's a long way to go.
Great. A question very similar, but more focused on making sure that we have, the entire state has access to state-of-the-art healthcare. I know you mentioned a couple different bills. Anything specific or any language specific to that?
Well, I think there's a couple different approaches to it. One is the public health departments where a lot of people go because that might be the only care, but they can't provide everything. And there aren't enough nurses to hire to bring into the public health departments, even if they could. So how can we leverage that private industry where they already have nurses, they already have facilities? How can we leverage and collaborate with them more and maybe utilize that aspect of it to offer or incentivize greater healthcare access to those who would not normally seek it? The other thing is, in the healthcare field, you kind of have three parties. You've got the patient who has absolutely no obligation to do what they're told to get better. And so they come back over and over again. You've got the doctors who are trying to provide good care for their patients who often have absolutely no idea what it costs, what they're prescribing. And then you have the insurance companies who want to have a say in what they're paying for, but don't always. So you kind of got to, it's the air in the balloon. When you start squeezing one in, it's going somewhere. And so we really have to try and get all those parties to the table.
Okay, thank you. This is the yes or no question. Whoever answers first. Is the General Assembly going to raise the cigarette tax this year?
I doubt it.
I don't believe there's a bill for it.
Okay. Easy. All right. And along the same line of cigarettes, marijuana. Why will Indiana not legalize medical marijuana?
I'll weigh in just real quickly, maybe the members of the House too, because they just had a hearing on marijuana, decriminalization of marijuana this last week, but didn't vote it. And if people have ever sent me an email about marijuana, you probably got a response from me saying on medical marijuana, I've been supportive of that idea. Here's the problem. I couldn't give you an example of a state that has done medical marijuana that isn't just recreational marijuana, almost immediately. Mm-hmm. That's where it goes immediately. There's probably a couple different reasons for that, but the doctors aren't good gatekeepers, frankly. And I'm not being critical of doctors, it's just they're not going to be able to do that. Some doctors are going to be out there and give it to another. And I'm not a fan of legalizing recreational marijuana. It's a shame that we can't figure out how to do that in a way that helps the 4, 5, 6 conditions that marijuana might actually help some. But the House had a conversation about decriminalization. We've got some bills that pertain to that as well. At least for me only, it's just Rod Bray. You would find me interested in some decriminalization that takes some of the jail or the criminal penalties away from marijuana, but you're not going to get me to a point of being happy with legalization of marijuana. I think there's too many health and other social problems and complications that go along with that, even if it does create revenue for the state.
I'll give my opinion. It may not be popular in this room with some, but this is purely on the medical marijuana side. When I was still serving in the military, we had studies, worked with the Legion, with VFW, and not as surprising, the studies were done in Colorado, so a state where my daughter lives in Denver now. But we have a major crisis in the military of folks taking their lives and a lot of those folks are medicated and treated. Opioid is the new Motrin. Back in the day we used to joke, those that have been in the military, it was our Motrin candy, right? Every time something, they just give you Motrin. And the same thing with opioids. And we've seen a massive suicide rate, we've seen the depression, we've seen other stuff. And with the studies, and I'll just say personally, I lost my brother-in-law, and I get emotional from people, but I've lost some friends from PTSD and some other stuff. And so you see why this is important to me. So I helped with the studies and actually held these, I don't even know if you guys knew this, held in Indiana the second permit behind Purdue to grow and process hemp. And the reason why I didn't grow it, because we were looking at this stuff to help, how could we help the suicide rate stop? And what we found in these studies, tremendous of those that had taken themselves off opioids and started using different forms of, not just cannabis, but CBD stuff or things like that, we saw a massive drop in suicide rate and just all sorts of just good stuff. That's not real scientific word, but it was just a very successful test. And for pain management and a lot of other things that for a drug that you can't OD on, it's natural. It's, you know, when I had my major accident, they were giving me medical forms of opium and you know, ketamine and all those other things that had bad side effects. And so this was just a drug that, in my experience, just mine, has tremendously helped a lot of veterans. And so I'm for legalization of medical, for sure. And I know we have a lot of support in the House, and not that I look at polls, but I know there's like a 70-80% approval rating for people in Indiana that are for medical for a lot of these same reasons. And you could go into this stuff that's not my wheelhouse, but cancer and much other things. And I know you're right, it does lead to recreational in a lot of states, and I don't know the answer to that either. But that's not why I'm pushing it. It's just from a personal experience. And we do have a lot of support. I think if I'm still correct, the governor would probably still veto until it's legal nationally. So there's just a lot of good discussions going on, and that's just where I come from. So.
Well, I'll give my opinion. Even before I was in the legislature, I was always asked this, and here's my answer: I was always support hemp. You know, you think rope, not dope. Decriminalization is fine if that's going to lower our incarceration rate and get people help. The medical marijuana, I was always open to that discussion. The legalization of recreational use, I was never in favor of. What I have learned since then is there is no difference between medical and recreational. It is essentially one and the same. I could walk into a dispensary right now and say I don't have a medical card,